So let me introduce Willa, because I have been looking forward to her reading. Her second collection, In the Margins of the World, was awarded the 2002 Oregon Book Award for Poetry. Garrison Keillor read Biscuits, a poem from this volume on the Writer's Almanac. Her first poetry collection is Box Poems. She's won 2 Oregon Literary Art Fellowships in Poetry and received a grant in poetry from the Money for Women Barbara Deming Memorial Fund. She read from her most recent collection, Storytelling in Cambodia, throughout the United States and Canada. Many of you know that from 1992 to 1993, she worked with the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia. She read at the Library of Congress during their Poetry at Noon series. She's been a fellow at various centers. We also know that she is an LCSW. She is a licensed clinical social worker practicing in Northwest Portland, a photographer and a ceramic sculptor. You can find out more about Willa and check out her website. I'd encourage you to do that at threewayconversation.org. Or you can Google Willa and it will. The only one. She and threewayconversation.org will come up. Would you join me in welcoming our poet this evening, Willa Schneberg? Willa.
It's a pleasure to be here. What a cozy place. It's sort of interesting about, I see some people who just came in. Lynn, you want to sit down?
No, happy stand.
You sure? Okay. What is that? Does that say? Oh, somebody's cell phone's good. People are doing it automatically. They're stopping that process. Anyway, normally I'm just finishing working around this time. You know, when you're a therapist, you often see people after traditional work hours, so it's really wonderful to sort of get out a little sooner. And before I start my reading, I want to say that it's such a small world. I know Jan Barrows, and she is also a writer as well as a visual artist. Her book you may have read or know about is Jose Builds a Woman, and she lives part of the time in Mexico, in San Miguel de Allende. So she has a special relationship with Mexican culture. What I realized today is that it's fun for me when I do a reading is kind of to think about a theme that I can kind of weave throughout the reading. And tonight I thought I would have poems that relate to the creative process, relate to writing, to what happens when you translate the spoken word to the written word. And what happens when you actually, if you're telling something from your history and then you recreate it in a poem, it becomes something else. And sometimes that history becomes more real to you than the lived experience. Or isn't that what art is really about? So I'm going to start by reading a poem by Sara Lance. And I'm sorry to say, I thought I brought some copies of her book, which is called Far Beyond Triage. She was a close friend of mine and a poet who is also published through Calyx Books, which is a press that's been for over 30 years publishing the poetry of women and also fiction. They have Calyx Journal and also a series of books that they've been doing for over 30 years. And right before her book was going to come out, she had brain cancer. So she saw the galleys of her book, but she never actually held the book in her hand. But she was able to see, if you know, like sort of how what they call the pre-publication copies, they look almost like the real book. So she did get to see this beautiful cover before her passing. So I'm going to start with this poem by Sara Lance. Because of you, no small canton of moss beside a brook shall ever be without secrets. Because of you, tide charts shall be noted to explain the moonlight inside my mouth. Because of you, I may once again drag my body from its winter bed into the darkness to watch Venus rise. I may even consider how the horizon, blind and impenetrable, can always be the junction of sea and sky. Because of you, if an old, awful pain haunts me, comes crawling on her haunches into my small ears, witness to dark hags, my breath will catch a second less because of you. I can remember all of what I knew before I was born, that each spirit has a home, and even if for a lifetime, you and I watch each other from across an ashen-colored bay, with no boat between us, I swear, the moment my feet hit the river Styx, I shall set out for you at once. So what I wanted to now read is a poem that I wrote to commemorate her passing. I don't know if where you live, if you have plum trees, but we have plum trees, and sometimes we have a ton of plums. We don't know what to do with them. We give them away to everyone in sight, and sometimes we don't have such a good crop. But the particular year of her death, they were very, very rich. Italian plums. For Sara Lance, October 28th, 1958, September 10th, 2007. We climb up lichen-encrusted limbs to pluck purple, black fruit, protected with white powder that hides their sheen. We are inundated with plums, burdened by bounty. Why do we merit this small happiness? Plums boiling down in the big stainless steel pot, mason jars brimming with jam, brown paper bags bulging with enough for everyone. If only this plethora of plums could bring you back. But their days are even shorter than yours. They have burst their skins and are staining pavement. You are alive, but are no longer, and will not savor the juice of even one small plum. She had a great laugh, so she would be, you would be hearing her laugh. So as I said, in this theme of the creative process of writing, I'm going to read from a very ancient book called Box Poems that you'll see it on the desk, but I still had brown hair, and I used to wear a flower in my hair. So you can imagine how ancient this was. One of my early jobs this is the late 70s, was to work in it was basically a rehab center for senior citizens. It wasn't really a nursing home. It was kind of like a geriatric hospital. For those days, it was kind of the state of the art. And they had a room that someone donated that was a complete letterpress print shop. And I had studied letterpress, and so I was like blown away. So what we did is that we would make all the little cards that they needed, in the geriatric center, and then I was doing poetry groups with old people, and we printed their book too, in larger, like 18 point, so everyone could see it. And now as we're moving into everything digitized, I feel particularly honored to have that relationship with actually getting your hands with ink. Print shop, Friday afternoon, And it was a Jewish nursing home, a geriatric center, so the Friday afternoon has special significance. Print shop Friday afternoon. E's distributed in their large spaces, double F's in their tiny spaces, chases upright in the rack, joints squirted with oil. When the old men leave, the metal plates gleam. All week talks hard above the press's wheeze. Rollers slide against type. Beds follow, their paper poised for impression. Friday afternoon, no hands jerk the handles, clanking the machines into motion. No one is there to name this upside-down mirror writing language. And we know that the creative process, and those of us who are writers, painters, musicians, that there is the literal truth and then there's the authentic truth. There's the truth that we feel. And that's what genuine imitation is. And this is what this poem's entitled. And it has some references to Boston. So have any of you been or lived in Boston? Okay, so a few of you. So you may recognize some of these references. Genuine imitation. Give me the fake, the imitation, the simulation any day over the real thing. Give me the bronze garbage in Haymarket Square with the inlaid, crumpled Boston globe, embedded lettuce leaves, flattened fish scales. They will never be burned, bagged, or rotted. Give me the plaster life-size cows, black with white spots, shaped like clouds. In the parking lot outside the Hilltop Steakhouse, who will not experience the irritation of flies or the teat-sucking machine. Give me my daughter's model trains, endlessly circling towns that have no pollution. Everyone's welcome, and who's ever sick goes to the doll hospital. Give me the poem, its room not even a page wide, where one enters as often as one likes to watch the man place quarters on his dead wife's lids, to feel the grief not your own. Now, I don't know if you may have seen on the Macs or the buses a channel card that actually has just one line of one of my poems. Now, it's it's been up for a long time, but I have to say that one of my friends who lives in New York was taking the Macs to the airport, and he just swiped one. He just took it away, and he said everyone seemed to be sleeping. And in general, Portlanders are pretty nice people, so nobody was going to sort of attack him for taking away poetry, But so, just to give you a hint that you may recognize the very, very last line of this poem. I don't, it was. You probably wondered how people get to be in that. I mean, there's something called poetry in motion, which is all over the country. But in our neck of the woods, the way it's been chosen is you have to be either the winner or a finalist of the Oregon Book Award, and then they pick, but you have no choice in what they pick. It's always a big surprise. So anyway, so this is again on the theme of what it is to be writing what you truly want to write, as opposed to those papers that you had to write in school that you were not very inspired to write. When words go on vacation. This whole year you type words wearing 3-piece suits, $100 words disgusted by poems, hang gliding, messages in bottles. They know to march in line, in paragraphs, and fill up white paper until their numbers reach 1,000. They never pretend to be anything they are not. The objects at their beck and call become just like them and never dream of masquerading. The desk lamp as a pink flamingo, the sharpened pencil as a dart hurling to a bull's eye. But now they are on vacation, taking a breather from breeding in the collar of your starched button-down and inside your silver cufflinks, to invade the front of your crumpled orange t-shirt with their new motto, "Every galosh is a glass slipper waiting to samba." In the 80s, it's always how I hope the Department of Defense should spend their money, but I actually was an artist in residence on American military bases in the Far East. So for 6 months, I was in the Philippines, Korea, Japan, and Okinawa, doing workshops with kids from kindergarten through seniors, and some workshops with the community colleges, some of the military. And as was mentioned, I'm also a clay sculptor. So I was there as a poet and a potter. So I got to meet some Japanese potters, and this poem was kind of inspired by that. Again, it's in what writing does. Note to my Japanese lover, I wish I had the lacquerware writing box, its black lid sprinkled with golden flakes, for stars and ferns and the carriage that whisked Yago away to her rendezvous with Genji. But in the deserted mansion during the night, the spirits jealous of their loved turned her body cold before she could touch him. The ink stick skims water and the ink stones well and rubs against stone for ink blacker than your hair. Ink flows through bristles of bamboo brush to kiss rice paper with its moist black tongue. So I, with a hand of EQ, may write of my longing. A courier presents you my poem attached to a sprig of cherry blossom. The great ocean separates us. My hands try to keep busy. I wear my hair down. Let me get a little water. So how old is this place? Does anyone know?
There's a lot of people that were here and came here when it was a medical facility.
Oh, really?
Yes. So there used to be some medical offices here.
Huh.
In fact, I was talking with one of them just today.
Right here.
Here, yeah.
It's amazing. So, but this is returned to how it was before it was medical offices?
Mm-hmm. That's what I understand.
So now I'm going to read the poem that's on the broadside. And I think there's some times where language is not necessary. We don't need the words. Bedding down. Yippee! It's time for the egg cups to lie on their sides, the knives flat on their backs, the cards neat in their decks in the kitchen drawer, for the window's big eye to flirt with the moon, and for the two who undress in that room, not to fight or bemoan what they didn't do today or need to do tomorrow, but to climb in nude as olives between flannel sheets and fit together like a teaspoon and tablespoon, measuring nothing. So some of you may know that I worked in Cambodia from 92 to 93 with the UN, and part of my job was helping to set up registration sites in Phnom Penh. And then when they realized I was a therapist, I wound up doing what they called medical liaison work. So let's say somebody stepped on a landmine and they had to be repatriated, or if someone came, let's say, from a country like, we had a number of people who came from countries where in their country they didn't drink and suddenly they could. And also the fact that marijuana was just sold as another herb in the market. So you can imagine that some people actually developed substance abuse problems or enhanced ones that they came with. So part of my job was to sort of get them in line. Okay. I actually have a poem about me doing therapy but I'm not going to read that one, in Phnom Penh. So I thought I would read two poems that are found poems. So again, that's when we have the eye, it's like, Duchamp and the toilet. If we have the eye, something becomes art. And it's really how we look at it. And so these two found poems, one was when I actually arrived in Cambodia as part of the mission. There was a sign that we were given at the briefing to protect ourselves from landmines. And basically I didn't change it, it's just listed it as they told us. Khmer advice on protection from mines. 1, do not play with mines. 2, do not go near mines. 3, do not touch or pick up things that are unknown. 4, do not touch valuable things in unlikely places. 5, do not go to unknown or prohibited places. 6, watch out for booby-trapped items in areas where fighting is ongoing. 7, do not go into areas that are likely to be mined areas or people say are mined. 8, follow in the footsteps of the person in front if possible. 9, pray to ancestors, wear amulets and apply tattoos. 10, have a strong belief in the power of magic and the magical powers of the person who provides this protection. 11, always ask villagers what places are mined. Most of the time they know the exact place where mines have been laid. 12, assume that there is more than one mine and that mines have been planted in groups. 13, mark the mine using a marking sign. So the one good thing I can say about this is you could see that they incorporated some of the ways the Cambodians themselves have learned how to deal with mines. Because when the Cambodians, when the UN first came there, most of the mine clearers were from other countries, the minesweepers, but happily now Cambodians have become their own minesweepers and are able to use that technology in other places where the mines are as tragically in existence. So this other one is tragic, and part of, this book is written in sections, and each section relates to another aspect of Cambodian history. So I start with the Angkor period, and I go into the French colonial period, and then the killing fields, and then the United Nations presence, and then time after I actually left. So there's a whole section that's about the killing fields, and I thought I wasn't going to, sometimes my readings could be particularly dark, so there's only going to be a few really dark poems. But this one was written by, again, a found poem, by an AP reporter, Mian Ling, who was sending his dispatch. And this was the last message that he sent. With a small typewriter, I alone in post office, losing contact with our guys. One guy seeing me is Moonface at 1300. I feel rather trembling. Do not know how to file our stories. Vitesse lost his camera to the black jacketed guys. Those are the Khmer Rouge. How quiet the streets. Every minute changes. I, with a small typewriter, shuttle between the post office and home. May be my last cable today and forever. This was when the Khmer Rouge came into Phnom Penh. And what we do know is he was killed the next day. Because we're at a library, or almost at a library, next door to a library, I'm going to read this poem about a librarian, which happens to be loosely based on Ben Schneberg, who happens to be my father, who was a librarian. And he worked in a law library in New York. So he used to take the train from Brooklyn every day. Sometimes it would take him an hour and a half to get into the city to go to Wall Street. And then later in life, he wound up working in a public library. So he worked in the neighborhood library where my parents lived in Brooklyn in his later years. So it got me thinking about the parallels between the library in Phnom Penh, which was there. It'd be like our central library, a grand library that, if you could imagine how people were treated by the Khmer Rouge, you could imagine how they treated books. The librarian. He cannot stop thinking about Pol Pot's cadre living inside the French antebellum yellow building of the National Library in Phnom Penh, where book corpses shared the grounds with pigs, and human swine wrenched books off shelves, yanked out pages of palm and mulberry leaves to light fires or roll their own smokes. He knows there are more books in his small branch library in Brooklyn than in all of Cambodia in 1977. He dutifully dusts the dust jackets of all the books, but they do not mind and snap to attention when he claps his hands. He cannot make the Cliff Notes patrons disappear, nor stop the library from subscribing to Reader's Digest. So he must, in his own time, edit out the histories of horrors plummeted into paragraphs, at least on the pages that his palms caress. Bombs will become bowling balls. If only you could polish each phrase, thaw every frozen syllable, wouldn't the healing begin? Doesn't ink soak up blood? I think this is one of the missions of poets. Is there a way that through language that somehow we can impact on these tragedies? At least we try, knowing that the word doesn't always impact, but certainly we know in many countries, much more than our own, the words of poets have very much been used to fight oppression. The manuscript that I'm working on at the moment is about my parents, and just to give you a little overview, my dad died in 2000, my mom died in 2001, and in the last year and a half of my mom's life, everything that she would have spoken, she wrote, because she had larynx cancer. And basically they removed her larynx. And she was too vain to use one of those speaking devices, and she had been an English teacher, so she had a lovely handwriting, and she felt like she really kept her dignity. So it's not like having somebody's journals. I actually have what she spoke. And for a while, she didn't, her hearing wasn't the greatest, and so for a while it's even both people. There's the person who was speaking to her wrote what they had to say, and she wrote back. So I have some of those. And later, as her hearing improved, there's just the one-way conversation. But I'd much rather have her with me. But as you can imagine, that kind of material is pretty amazing. And so that was sort of the impetus for this manuscript about the parents. But I thought I would read this poem again with the theme of writing and literature. Did any of you ever change your handwriting? Did you ever feel like you had this really lousy handwriting, you sort of retort yourself? It looks like a number of people have yeah. Well, I have a lousy handwriting, and I basically print everything. But my father, who was much more industrious than myself, he decided he was going to do something about his lousy handwriting. And so that's what this is about. Penmanship. I can do this right and not be my father, the haberdasher, who sold tie tacks and silk shirts to young men with a future, until he ran away from bill collectors. And again, this is in my father's voice. I realize you might. Many of the poems are persona poems. I can't make Esther want another child or deny my crazy anxiety, or my heart won't stop pounding, like when the IRT spit me out at Brooklyn College. The doors opened and I froze until I crossed over to the platform's other side to safety and the wait for the New Lots train back to Brownsville, defeated, hunched in a corner, single seat. I don't slouch when I ready myself at the small desk for writing bills, my feet flat on the floor, the Waterman still in its case, vellum sheets slanted to the left. I am up to lesson 26 in my workbook, the complete program for a better cursive handwriting. I am tracing the A, sashaying to the H, dipping to the Y, and the little hillocks of M's docilely chained together. I have perfected my exit and entrance serifs. A wizard jumped quickly over 7 frog boxes, my curlicues and the loops of my P's. Please pair a pair of pears. It's not. That's actually in the book, if you can believe it. Before, I wrote a chicken scrawl, like someone who could barely sign his name, a nobody, not the handsome hand of a man who leaves shopping lists for lesser mortals, who pens words you do not turn away from. Tonight's exercise is a formula poem I am to trace. Nobody is, and add my thoughts with a flourish. Like a job well, nothing is, I am to trace, nothing is, and add my thoughts with a flourish. Like a job well done, friendship is, knowing you won't be let down. My mother was an amazing reader. You know, she's like one of those people, you know, if the cereal box is in front of her, she'll read it. I mean, she read constantly. You know, when I was a kid, she would be so engrossed in whatever she was reading. You know, like we, you know, would have like, you know, she had 3 newspapers every night, and whatever she was reading, I'd have to literally yell at her, you know, Ma, you know, because she would be like so gone. And I have to say, I think I've inherited that style of reading. I mean, I'm sure for all of us, could you imagine what life would be like if you couldn't read? I mean, it's just like that's, you know, like so essential to us. So this is imagining my mom, one of the many, many times of her being in bed reading. And you can imagine for someone who lost her ability to speak, she could still read. She's still connected to that part of herself that was always there, that made her sort of feel like she was still herself, you know. Her life as a reader. Words enter her stealthily, join hands to become sentences, then skip into story. All the characters tell her their secrets, that they were once young and used to sit in a window seat in the house of the book's parlor. They would only leave when they had to, go to school, play with their sisters, or have fun the way they were supposed to, by jumping double Dutch or constructing a worm farm. Years later, in those rare moments of quiescence, after putting the children down, they would climb back into that gingerbread house appearing on the hill. Sometimes they would raise hands up high and catch paragraphs from Orlando or look homeward angel, and only the smell of burning black-eyed peas would force them back. Now some have holes in their throats, and the pages tell the tale of a woman who speaks through writing in a notebook with a black marbleized cover. She still loves to prop up in bed, a light clipped to her bedpost, a book open in her lap. Excuse me, I'm having a little allergy. Hers may be the only light in their home, in their town. I'm just going to get some water. I actually have these lozenges, which I should take. I knew I might start coughing. So probably what you noticed is that Esther has then became a character in one of those books that she loved, you know. And now she is. She's in this book. Whatever gets published in this lifetime, you know. The next one is, for the last year and a half of Esther's life, she moved to Brooklyn after, maybe even a little less than that. I mean, moved from Brooklyn to Portland after my dad died. And this is again where the notes come in, because she was directing what was going to be moved from her home in Brooklyn to Portland. She had a house with a few bedrooms. She was moving to one bedroom, so she was not pleased. And the way she could take some control is she would put the Post-its on everything, so we would know. But of course, we didn't get everything. She wasn't pleased, but we tried. Post-its for the movers. Ben was nowhere. The Jewish agency had taken all his clothes and the hangers that held them. Now, Esther was leaving Brooklyn for good, and the only home she and Ben ever owned. With her mother's money from the corset store, they were able to move next door to Canarsie, to a house that stood alone with a front yard and a backyard. They bought a barbecue. They were close enough to Jamaica Bay that seagulls circled overhead and cried. When the wind was right, Ben and Esther inhaled the sea. Esther stuck Post-it notes onto the reupholstered maroon couch, the green lamp that looked like a cactus, the cedar box lined with red velvet for the cut below sterling silver, the abstract acrylic by the Greenwich Village artist who said he painted it on a trip. Only years later did she understand what he meant. Later, she could choose what to take to her one-bedroom apartment. At least she could choose what to take to her one-bedroom apartment near her daughter, who lived in Oregon. Esther would squeeze the king-size bed into her new bedroom. Her daughter remembers her parents at the farthest edges of that vast ocean. Two freighters separated by thick fog. But it wasn't always that way. Now I'm going to read one more poem, and then I'm hoping people will be open to some questions. And this is kind of ties together a number of things. What I like to do is embedded in the book that I have finished are the theme for the next book. So in the last chapter of the storytelling in Cambodia, there are some poems already about the parents appearing. So it's like a little fun for me to sort of embedding that. So this poem basically ties up what I've been talking about for our time together, the power of the written word. laryngectomy for Esther Schneberg. They cut out her voice like so many before and after her. Others will decide they know what she is thinking and will speak for her. But there will always be the yellow pad, the spiral notebook, the loose sheet of paper, by a bed, on an end table, attached with a magnet to the refrigerator, the sharpened pencil, the fine point pen, the black magic marker hanging from a string, and the words, wise, fierce, raucous, filling up the pages of the world. Thank you. Is that too short?
No.
Okay.
You talked about the mine situation in Cambodia, and I'm curious about the situation these days. Are there still a lot of mines left in the country?
Well, at that point, there was one mine for every 2 people in the country. It's not quite as bad now because, again, Cambodians are taking more care. But, I mean, there's a long history. You know, certainly there are mines from the Khmer Rouge, mines, as we know, when we weren't supposedly invading Cambodia, the U.S. never went in there. There's a long history of mines. So, but it's the equipment is more effective now, and so more work is being done, and hopefully there are new mines being laid because the Khmer Rouge are basically, you know, as probably some of you may know, that there's the equivalent of the War Crimes Tribunal that is UN-sponsored that's in Cambodia, and so some of the highest-ranking people, in fact, one of the people I actually wrote about, people are being tried, but because Hun Sen is, he was a Khmer Rouge who's the head of Cambodia and did not stay in power legitimately, he really doesn't want to do a full investigation of what's going on because he knows that other people like himself might be brought up to the tribunal. So they're doing it on just a certain level, but not going any further than that. So any questions?
You focused on the creative process. So could you talk about your writing practice?
What I've noticed in my last 2 books, margins, just beginning, but very much in storytelling, is that I now do think of a book as a collection. So when I'm writing, I kind of try to put a frame around. You know, when I was first writing, I would just write. And of course I still keep a journal and I just write whatever comes up. But now it's like I have this book in mind and I have poems that relate to each other. So I really am very consciously thinking about, okay, how is this poem going to relate to that poem? So it is, in a sense, because I do, in general, write more narratively. Of course, I think there's too much of a dichotomy between someone who's considered a lyric poet and a narrative poet. But I think there are definitely themes in my work, and so I find that I'm very conscious at this point. The way I'm envisioning this manuscript about my parents at the moment, there's a section with of Esther, Ben, and Willa. They each have their own sections, and then each person has like a scrapbook of the poems that relate to them. So it's very much conceived as this 3-way conversation between the 3 characters in this book.
Thinking about what you said about a lot of your poems are dark, and I'm wondering, when you're writing about Cambodia, it's obviously a dark time that you're writing about. You're setting out to do I'm assuming a thought comes to your mind. Is it a dark thought, and does it carry you in a dark way, or are you just thinking about, I want to reflect on this, and then the success of the poem, does that leave you feeling dark?
That's a really good point. Well, I think for those of you who do write poems that tend to be dark, I mean, the creative process makes it not dark because it's a way of understanding yourself. And so, for those of you who know me as a visual artist, my clay sculpture is very playful, bright colors. It's sort of another part of me. And I do think that the things that affect me most deeply and the things that I have more of a, should I say, a paradoxical relationship to, or something that I feel like I'm sort of working through, tend to be what poetry is for me. So those, I'm not saying that I obviously wrote the poem Bedding Down. I wrote that. I could write about joyful things, but there's no doubt that the impetus to sort of work through something that has been troubling and turn it into a work of art that other people can actually experience as well seems to be really important to me. And I started writing poetry in high school when I was quite miserable. So that tradition I certainly know about. But as we know, you know, when I work with young people, if that's the only time you write, then that's a problem. Because we can write about anything. Anything is material. There's nothing that's not material. So I think that if it's just connected to sort of your angst, I think that's something to consider, that may be just a form of personal expression, then rather than you entering poetry as a creative art with all the craft that's involved.
Do you find your writing and your ceramic sculpture interacting? Does one inform the other ever?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I have this friend who's doing this collaborative series where people who collaborate with other people. So sometimes I joke about that I'm collaborating with myself. But I have one poem that's called Boxcar Bertha Rides Again. It's about this wobbly woman who rode the rails like in the teens and 20s. And I also did a clay piece about that. So occasionally they do inform each other. The work I'm doing right now, because I'm going to have a little show in July at a gallery in the Pearl District, is relating to spiritual, the time I spent, in Cambodia and Southeast Asia. So, and I have a Buddhist meditation practice. So I feel like the book after this one, once I finish The Parents, will be more about Buddhist-inspired stuff. So I can see that the impetus is there, but in that sense, the clay is kind of coming before the poetry.
Who are other poets that you like or have influenced you?
One of the poets that has been important to me is Callum Forshay, and I felt really honored to be able to introduce her a few years ago when she came to Portland, because she's a poet of witness, and certainly some of you may know that there's a real controversy about what's considered poetry of witness. I mean, can you write about something that respectfully that isn't your own personal experience? And she got a lot of flack for that when she first did that, and I think she paved the way for others of us to write about deeply felt experiences that are not necessarily our own. Well, thank you.
If there are any more questions, Willa's going to be here, and there are flyers and books, and some coffee and treats.
And if you want to ask me about my workshop, please do.
Please
Serious.
enjoy. Thank you very much.
Yeah.